Hello, hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains, kings and peasants, angels and rodents, or maybe you like the dirt or the stars above, everlasting and neutral, always there, independent of our human valuations and judgments. I thought about this beginning beforehand, clearly, and I thought that it might provide the viewer a drawing of the gamut of what we as people experience, all of the grades of particulars that we experience, whether we value them highly or we don't value them very much, or if there are certain aspects of experience which endure and don't really depend on our value judgments for their existence. They persist quite independently. That there are those, what we call objectivities, or sometimes facticities, that are just there regardless of the individual who happens to be perceiving or dealing with them. And then there are the subjectivities or subjectifications of individuals where they are in some mysterious way introducing their own personalized facts which don't pertain much to other people but are nevertheless real in their personal reality that nobody else experiences. And today we're going to be talking about meditation. It is quite interesting. I am new to the literature of phenomenology, yet I've been practicing sitting meditation for years now, maybe about 6 years, and I'm 23 years old, and doing it pretty consistently every day, essentially. I mean, now and then there's a day where it doesn't happen, but there's just something that very much intrigued me about it, and especially after having had a psychedelic experience coincidentally 6 years ago, and that sort of opened my eyes to the possible landscapes and understandings and states that one can attain to in subjectivity, that what we call unreality and illusion, that somebody can just get lost in their own head, just taken by their own thoughts. Well, that certainly can happen, and I would like to think that meditation can counteract that. But in the same swing, it also opens up these states that, that is unfortunate. It opens up these states that were not accessible or were not properly perceived before. And meditation is commonly described as a training of the attention. And for example, Vipassana, which is the method that I have always used, you are supposed to direct your attention to some specific object of consciousness, and often it is recommended that one shift their attention to the feeling of air going in and out through the nostrils, or as the diaphragm expands and contracts. Just some rhythmic and repetitive sort of motion that you can just draw your attention to that. However, it succeeds, and pay attention to its succession, and, well, inevitably, and this is what everybody comes to learn, the mind wanders quite on its own, whether one wants it to or not. And I think it's actually a crude error that even a lot of teachers of meditation propound, to think that when that happens, you have made an error. You've done a wrong. You're not, in that moment that some thought came up and stole your attention away before you could think to stop it, that there you have committed some blunder, and for that brief second or two you weren't meditating until you drew your attention back to your breath. And we find in all of this this sense of self who's supposed to be manipulating the unfolding of this particular meditation experience, that there's some coachman, some man at the helm who has to direct the train and its speed and all of those factors. Well, this, it may be argued, and I think this is the stance I have come to take, that there is no wrong in meditation, and however it unfolds is really as it should be, and we can interpret it as being other than it should be, which is actually common and reflexive of people getting into meditation, and I have certainly been guilty of it myself. But there's a way of meditatively transcending these reflexes of judgment and interpretation. I committed a wrong. I thought about this thing that happened just the other day, when my full attention should be constantly on the breath. It's just absurd. Nobody can really do that. But here, if I'm saying that there's no wrong way to meditate, people may begin to think, well, what's the point of it? If there's no right way to do it, then basically we're always meditating. Then we're reaping the benefits of meditation without having to sit down. And in a strange sense, that is true. But I would say only insofar as you have attained to a perspective where you can watch the drama of your life and life as a whole from a place of, I would actually go so far as to say, certainty. And in the preface to this book of Husserl that I just read recently, reviewed in my last video, there was an introduction essay, not by Husserl, by somebody else, and he said that the method of phenomenology, of epoche, brings one to certainty, or what Husserl himself calls apodictic certainty, the only one, that there is no statement or fact of the world which we can address, especially not in verbal linguistic terms, which we can really say, this is it. This is an unwavering truth that is always the case, regardless of time and place. There's nothing really like that. And the more we think about statements about the world, or even psychic and internal phenomena, we just begin to realize what Husserl again called the Heraclitean flux of conscious existence, that is its essence. Is therefore all of the particulars of conscious experience are only particulars in a flash, and the moment we begin to try to confine them to some number or phrase, they've begun to differ in quality and quantity. That is the fact of the matter. And yet Husserl argues that in this context of lived human existence, there is still that basic apodictic, which is to say, it's a Greek word for clearly established or certain, truth or certainty upon which all, and I mean all, of the particulars of our experiences are predicated. And I can't really say what it is other than it. It's the it which gives rise to every other it. That it all goes back to this one thing, and this one thing is always constantly creating new illustrations for itself. Husserl calls the transcendental ego a being for itself, which leaves the impression of, say, being in a movie theater and watching the reeling scenes before you. That's what our lives are. There's that being, that original being upon which all experiences, facts, etc. are predicated, and then there's all those particular experiences and facts. And so, to tie this with meditation, I have found that it assuredly gets one into touch with the constant and incessant flux of conscious existence, and yet I was astounded just by the similarity of the phenomenological epoche and what almost of necessity happens to somebody who gets into meditation or psychedelics, but there's something about the practice of meditation as an ongoing sort of thing which really, I think, causes one to find abode in this, so to say, transcendental consciousness, or the transcendental subject, absolute pure ego. It's Husserl's method leads you to the very same place as meditation practice does. And, well, just a couple of years ago, I don't know if any of you know Alan Watts. I would actually be surprised if you didn't. But having listened to some of his talks, and I still love to listen to them, it's been a while, but I think he's great. After listening to some of his talks, I bought his book, The Way of Zen, and that was one of the most game-changing books I ever read. There was just, he said in so many variations, this one truth that is so ubiquitous that, especially just after meditation practice, after psychedelic experience, after that book, now after Husserl, there is this absolute vantage point, I guess I would call it, that really, I'm not certain about anything except it. And this theme, if you will, of attaining to some kind of absolute consciousness where you're not naively immersed in your experiences, in the particulars of your own experiences, but you see what they are all founded on. This is a change or development of consciousness that has been iterated in a lot of places in modern literature, and it also stretches back to ancient religious traditions that to say it in Christ's words, my kingdom is not of this world. And if you read that in a figurative and metaphorical sort of way, you consider all of the particulars that you experience about the world, and you realize that they, as is said in Eastern philosophy, are Maya. They are the illusion, the show, the movie, which blinds you to the whole theater, or something like that. You're getting so lost in the narrative, in the happenings, that you forget the basis and foundation for all of those, which the mere contemplation of which seems to, on the one hand, freshen your perceptions of phenomena in the world, whether you're a scientist or not, whether you are trying to acquire data and record it, or if you're just really genuinely concerned about some particular of your experience and you want to know more about this thing from all the possible perspectives of it. Just knowing that there is an absolute consciousness that you can attain to, wherewith you can, in so many words, circumambulate all of the things that you deal with in your life, and therefore get a comprehensive view, which all science and even art should strive for, of whatever particular things of experience you're dealing with. You're not fixated on the first perceptions of it, but you have walked around it and gotten a a rich view of whatever it is you're dealing with. And I have not so far talked very much about the self-therapeutic benefits of meditation in tandem with this clear, objective apprehension of particular phenomena. There seems to be firstly a redemption and a disentanglement from the challenging emotions that one experiences. You are, rather than being mixed into the stew of painful emotions, you are instead able to look at them. And if there's one point I would like to get across in this video, it would be allowance, or there's a phenomenological term of Heidegger for this, Gelassenheit. And somewhere else, it's called disponibilité, or translated in English, availability. This availability is a kind of superpower, I think. And if there's any freedom that we do have, I would say it lies in something like this, that if you reach a place of availability and receptivity towards, say, painful and challenging emotions, wherefore you're not trying to correct them or to jimmy your way out of them, but purely as they are, as phenomena, because they are that. You are available to them, allowing them to perform their unique motion in your individual existence. You become much more aware with meditation and with phenomenological epoche of what Jung calls in the Undiscovered Self, the individuality of all facts. All happenings that occur to one are, whether one recognizes it or not, so distinct and so nuanced, so rich, that were one to be always in the habit of seeing the richness of the phenomena one experiences, one might not be able to get very much work done. This is why Huxley said that psychedelics, where psychedelic used to become widespread, nobody would get anything done because they would be so occupied with seeing the actual richness of things, as opposed to simplifying them, extracting what is useful from them, and moving about in the world in a productive and practical manner. We couldn't really found and sustain societies were everybody to be psychonauts and concerned with these states of connection to the deeper layers of life, which meditation and phenomenology can enable one to see. But I think there is a way of balancing that praxis of life, that aspect of life, and the seeing, the beatific vision of life in its full profundity. And this is, well, for me, it's the seeing is an experience that I cherish very much. Unfortunately, however, I haven't encountered very many people who are very concerned with it. They can move through life without really having any concern for how phenomena articulate themselves, or that they occur at all, can move through life with a sort of, sometimes I would say, ingratitude toward what life itself offers. that there are possible experiences and states that can be attained to, and these, especially today, I think we have alienated and begun to treat as sort of phantasmagoric and religious mania, that to see life richly and with richness, it's dangerous. There's this danger label on it that you're not supposed to see like that, except in dreams, except in childhood. And yet, people like myself want to bring the dream realm into reality and attain to I don't want to say childishness, childlikeness once again, because there's a great distinction there that children are available to the life that they partake in and that gives itself to them and that works through them. We get older, and especially in the West, where we have this very acute sense of self, of being distinct from others, of being this, as I said before, helmsman who is in control, who must always be self-policing, that we begin to lose that availability because we are checking and regulating all of the happenings that come our way and trying to make them bend to some particular narratives that we value, rather than being available and allowing whatever happens to happen such as it happens. And there I kind of just use some phenomenological poetry, which Heidegger is an expert on. There is a way of talking which he tried to perfect and bring to the fore of the reader's consciousness, that their language hitherto, philosophy hitherto, has not been faithful to what he calls being. That it has a certain behavior and structure which can be communicated through language, with language that corresponds to being, while philosophers have tried to impose arbitrary interpretations on things rather than be available to them, not pass judgment on them, but in a Husserlian kind of way, suspend all judgment and be in perfect touch with phenomena as they occur naturally. And I said before that meditation has the benefit of detaching one from the negative emotions that are experienced firsthand, that it gives one the, so to speak, eternal perspective from which you can observe particular phenomena the more lucidly and freshly. And interestingly enough, meditation and phenomenology, I'm kind of just using them in tandem now because they do the same thing as far as I can tell. But each of them has the benefit of giving rise to what many would call mystic states. And to elaborate on that, it's not that they throw you into this realm of fantasy and delusion where people can't understand you anymore because you're just lost in some realm of nonsense. On the contrary, it throws you into a realm of clear and pure sense, like the child who is available to life. But there's something I've found in Western moral teaching and instruction which seems to have the downside, the fatal downside, of closing one's senses to happening. I just mean raw, uninterpreted, unjudged happening as it occurs to a private individual subjectivity. And thus, owing to this unfortunate consequence of certain moral teaching, people find themselves in enigmatic psychological situations where their mind, their human nature itself is, so to speak, talking in them, and they don't have an open ear anymore. They're not receptive, available, allowant to the happenings that they are and that occur in them and in relation to them. That there's a certain lack of freedom and easefulness before all happenings that causes an individual to basically struggle his way, strive through life in this emotional, intellectual cramp where they're living on a bad interpretation of their own life or life in general, and they have emotions that have not been dealt with. And the ease of dealing with emotion is actually quite surprising, but it is far from easy until, my power has been going out a lot this morning. There there are many people I know, because I was one, and I know what it looks like, who have undealt with emotions, have unrich, unsophisticated, unrefined interpretations of their own life and life in general, so that they're living in this perpetual cramp, this false sense of self, and they haven't yet made the proper steps to getting back to something like one's original self. And the word self is very, very problematic to my mind. It clearly seems to point to the obvious fact that each individual human being has this particular vantage point from which they view life, and owing to which they go through it. And yet, self implies some kind of permanence, some definite unity, and while I find that may be the case, that there is to each man something like a unity and a permanence some permanent entity. Where it is, what it is, how it is constituted, all of those things, I find that to be the greatest, among the greatest of mysteries, and that, to no fault of our own, we tend to have a shallow view of what that unity and permanent entity is. Well, I find myself agreeing more with Husserl now that I've started to read him about the transcendental subject being, in a sense, the answer to that question. So, I don't see meditation as maybe absolutely necessary to attaining to this absolute kind of consciousness where you are not anymore in the trap of your false sense of self, false sense of reality, but you are perfectly, I'm now starting to say allowant, I'm going to coin that word if it hasn't been made already, allowant or available to what is and what happens in its uninterpreted freshness. This is a state, a way of being aware of what is, that is very much possible, and people, I believe, do get to it, even quite spontaneously, without their thinking about it or willing it. And here they have what they feel to be moments of insight or understanding, of clarity of perception. And that's actually how Heidegger describes it. He has called the experience of a return to pure being. He said that that experience has taken on mystic quality because ordinarily people are so uprooted from being and are therefore, as he says, homeless. Meditation has the benefit of situating you in an undeniable and lasting way in that home, such that you can be available to what is and what occurs is going to occur, while before one may have had the foible, it's a fun word, the tragic flaw of maybe not being acceptant of the experiences that one finds oneself in, saying that they should be just thus wise, and then life would be good enough. And you got this interpreting monkey chattering in your brain, and it's blinding you to what is and what is unfolding in its freshness. And I guarantee that anybody who can attain to that can begin to see the profundity of life, its beauty and inexhaustibility, that really, if even for just a moment we could begin to see things clearly for what they are, as they are, and know differently, then we would at last realize that there is room for everlasting search. Things only become boring and uninteresting because we have not reached that place where everything is interesting. And if you can get there, then maybe life will compel you to be a scientist or an artist or some seeker, some venturer of some kind, where you are quite well occupied because you have gotten a glimpse of just how availing life can be, what sort of insight it is capable of providing, and that just by becoming totally free and available to everything that is, such as it is, that life actually begins to work more. You begin to correspond more with life and it with you, that there's not as much tension and scruple between you and life as a whole. And this is something like what Carl Jung, I think, seems to imply with his, or rather the alchemist's, idea of the conjunctio oppositorum. Something like, well, there's a million different combinations of it, but I'll just take this one, the visible and the invisible. People, in a Heideggerian sense, are uprooted from being and therefore homeless because they're so involved and gullible to what is visible that they don't think that there is anything invisible that they're not seeing, and which may be able to be seen if only one were not so enslaved to the visible. That what is obvious and apparent has so much about it that is far from obvious and that demands active attention and devotion in order to be understood or apprehended. And, well, I'll end it there. There's a great Nietzsche quote I could use from, or passage from his Gay Science that I could use, that in effect, he says that nothing is more unknown than what we consider familiar. He says it much more elaborately than that, but that's the gist of it, and I thoroughly believe that. And if we could just take this eternal and comprehensive stance toward all that we think is obvious and self-evident, and look at it with new and fresh eyes, then all of those things which before about it were invisible might start to become visible, and we may therefore become more enamored with life and grateful for it. So I'll end it there. Thanks, guys.